in any questions, any comments, things you'd like to see, things that you'd like to know about. It's always wonderful to get questions from everybody. We've had loads over the last, well, yesterday when I did it, and the last time I was on last month. So please do send them in. It's great to hear from you and interact with you all. And if you don't know how to do that, you can go via our YouTube channel, which you can also subscribe to. You can use the hashtag WildEarth on X, and you can also register on our website and send in any questions, and I will do my absolute best to answer them for you. My name is Ben Coley, and yeah, very much looking forward to going on this journey with you. We have, of course, started half an hour earlier today. We've had a slight time change to combat the shortening days as the southern hemisphere begins to move into winter. Shorter days, earlier sunsets, and we'll discuss that a little bit later on, but some of the other timings have changed for the rest of today, so take that into account. But for now, let's watch these flamingos. So most of them standing on one leg for a little bit of a rest, control heat regulation, and we can see one filtering food, or in the top right as well, using those rather specialised bills, pretty unique to the flamingos, where they have a movable upper jaw instead of a lower jaw, which is itself is unusual, skimming through the water, pumping their tongue as much as sort of 15, maybe even 30 times a second. And that creates water pressure, which then brings water into the beak and pushes it out through little lamellae, which are like little filters on the side of the beak, so it gets rid of all the water and keeps in any piece of aquatic material or little diatoms, little sort of plankton-like organisms from which they get their food. So a few messages coming in already. Thank you very much. Patisse McGargan, nice to hear from you. Looking forward to a variety of wildlife and hopefully some education. Well, I will do my best for you. Joanne Mello, happy Thursday to you too. Mercedes Bean, looking forward to another day at the Waterhole. We certainly are. We've had some wonderful sightings over the last couple of days. Yesterday was a day filled with elephants and some beautiful images of some Hyraxes right next to the camera to finish off with, which was rather cute. So, of course, one of the characteristic things about flamingos is that red coloration. Now that is not a natural coloration, it is derived from their diet that we have just mentioned, and a lot of those things contain a particular pigment which is called, or a thing called carotenoids, and when the flamingo eats those, its body converts it into that red colour, and we see that in many birds. So if you see any reds on birds, it is a pigmented colour coming from those carotenoids that they get from their diet. So if you remove those things from their diets, they will lose that characteristic colour. One exception to that is the turacos, formerly known as the lories, that have their own unique red pigment, which is known as turacin, and that is actually created by the bird itself, so it's not reliant upon external sort of feeding habits or eating anything that contains those pigments, and they are unique in the avian world, hence why they are called turacos, because of the, I can't say it, turacin and turacubidin is the green. So any of you who know beautiful birds like the Neisner lory and the purple crested lory, that fabulous red colour that you see on the underside of their flight feathers when they are flying, that is not carotenoids. So you can see a lot of feather maintenance going on. Very important to keep those feathers in good condition, cleaning off any little external parasites, and we'll often see them dipping into that little preen gland at the base of their tail and then spreading those special oils around the rest of the feathers. But whilst we enjoy the flamingos, let's have a quick look and see what the weather holds in our different locations today. Incredible sense of balance that these birds seem to have. And they, of course, like many other birds and some animals, can also sleep standing up. They're just able to sort of lock that. It looks like a knee, but it's not. That's actually their ankle joints that we can see. Remember, birds basically stand on their tiptoes. So they do look as if they sort of bend the wrong way, but it is the ankle joints that we're looking at, not the knee. The equivalent of the knee would be up where the feathers join the leg itself. So elephant's another classic example of an animal that chooses to sleep standing up sometimes. Deborah Cosby, good afternoon. Asking whether or not these flamingos, these are lesser flamingos that we're looking at with that black tip to the bill, are native or endemic only to Africa. The majority of them are found in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, but there are other populations that are visible in Arabia and some other areas in Asia, like India and Pakistan. But as far as I know, the majority of the population resides in sub-Saharan Africa. There are breeding sites in Tanzania and in Botswana, and particularly in Namibia, in the Etosha area. My knowledge of Campus Dam in Kimberley is that it was they not that long ago put in sort of an artificial island for flamingos to use. And it's done very, very well. During the breeding season, there can be thousands of flamingos in this area. Not somewhere I have visited, though, unfortunately. Never been to Kimberley myself. But it would be lovely to see so many. Occasionally we do get sort of random flamingos. I've seen a couple in the Kruger area, but not something you see with alarming regularity. But a lovely haven for all sorts of water birds here. They look like some red-knobbed coots in the background. And I'd expect we would find a variety of things like moorhens, swamp hens, gallinads, and all sorts of little wading birds along the shore, stilts, plovers and lapwings, and no doubt lots of very confusing warblers in any reed beds that we would see in the surrounding area as well. Possibly a grebe that's just swimming out of shot there, a little grebe. Amazing sense of balance that these birds have. I'm sure under the ground those long toes are a little bit more equally placed, but you can see how off-centre that one sort of pivot is that they are balancing on. But it's just a good way to reduce stress on the leg. You'll see them alternating those legs. And as I said, in particularly warm environments, it's a good way to reduce heat loss, control temperature, of course, very, very important in Africa. Despite coming into winter, as you saw from the weather, we're still up into the sort of 30 odd degrees in most areas still. You can see that flamingo at the back there has got his head completely underwater, so we're looking for those little organisms, those little diatoms on the bottom level of the water, and when you see them skimming along the top, that's more when they're looking for that sort of blue-green algae and the cyanobacteria. You can just hear the toots in the background, that little noise that you can hear, very characteristic of water bodies in southern Africa. I don't know if, I don't think I've ever heard a flamingo make a noise, but they obviously do have a voice. It's more of a sort of a honking noise that they produce. Often when disturbed more than anything else, but generally a relatively quiet bird from what I know. I do miss the bird sounds. I used to think myself quite capable of identifying a multitude of bird sounds, but having been away from the bush for a few months on my travels, I know it's going to be one of those things that I'll have to fight hard to get back. It always happens, you come back after a bit of a break and you recognise all the songs, but whether or not your brain can fill in the gaps and actually connect the dots as to which bird that noise is coming from, that takes a little bit of time. It is certainly a lot more helpful if you've got somebody with you who can just say, yes, that is a such and such a warbler, or that's the red-billed quail, or whatever it might be. But you never really forget the sounds, but you do sometimes forget how to connect those dots within the brain. But it is one of the great challenges of birding, particularly in South Africa. It's great to know all the calls. It really does sort of connect you with the environment. You feel a part of what's happening, even if you're not seeing a great deal of animals, or even seeing the birds. Just hearing them is enough. And so if you're ever doing a bird list, like on South Africa's Birding Big Day that we do, hearing a bird is usually as good as seeing it. You can still record it. It's still proof that the animal's there, as long as you're careful that it's not some form of mimicking species, which a lot of birds are capable of course. But it was, I'm looking forward to getting back to South Africa in the next month or so, having been out in New Zealand. Beautiful country, but not a huge amount of diversity of birds where I was. To get 20 or 30 birds in a day would be an exceptionally good effort, whereas if we go into Kruger National Park, I'd expect to get well over 100 in any given day. Okay, but I think we're going to carry on and see what's happening at Rosie's Pan in Oliphants West Game Reserve. Yeah, so it's a nice little group of Impala ewes enjoying the shade there. So it looks like that might be a Transvaal saffron or something similar, but certainly what we call the weeping wattle or African wattle on the right-hand side. See if anything's actually happening at the waterhole itself. We do seem to quite often get elephant bulls coming down for a bit of a drink and a little bit of a mud bath. Hello to Catherine as well. Thank you for your note, Catherine. I'm glad you could join us. They're rather sedate today thus far. You can see these impalas still sheltering from relatively oppressive heat. Could be a lot worse, ladies. It could be a lot worse. But just chilling in the shade, ruminating, controlling that temperature, doing a little bit of grooming, a little bit of social bonding. It's very normal to find impalas hanging out close to waterholes. They are quite water-dependent species, despite being ruminants, and therefore, excuse me, despite being ruminants and being able to hold a lot of moisture or extract a lot of moisture, I should say, from the food that they're eating. They never stray particularly far from water, and there can be a little bit of a problem with that, particularly with man-made water sources like this one, which never really seems it never dries out because it's constantly pumped. So that means that the animals don't develop any sort of natural migration routes, leaving certain areas, allowing vegetation to recover. So you often find that the vegetation is relatively decimated in and around artificial water points. And impalas are, I don't want to say a problem, but they can be in great numbers or greater numbers. Just because they do have quite a good appetite and they're quite picky. They do like to choose the best foodstuffs because of that digestive system. That food's going to be in their stomach for quite a while, so it's best to choose the choice cuts from those plants, from those trees and those leaves, because if it's going to remain in your stomach for a while, it better be worth keeping in there. So something good for the digestive system to extract. Lenny, you want to know where I would like to visit that I haven't yet been to? Well, that's, I suppose, the phrasing of your question that opens it up to the entire world, but I'll stick to Africa for now. I think so. Top of my bucket list is to get to Zambia. I've never been up to Zambia. I want to go to Zambia for the birding, and also to get to South Luangwa. That's very high up on my list to spend a little bit of time exploring there. I think in terms of other areas, I am very keen to get to a continent I've never been to before, which would be South America, again, predominantly for the wildlife, and Central America for that matter. I would be very, very keen to look at Costa Rica. I know there's some incredible things there. The fact that they have an active volcano, as terrifying as that can be, I would love to be able to see an active volcano. They've got cloud forests with plenty of butterflies. I almost said buffalo. Plenty of butterflies. They've got sea turtles nesting on the banks or on the beaches there. And I think the one thing that always attracted me to Costa Rica is the fact that if you look at the size of Costa Rica compared to South Africa, it's tiny. Southern Africa holds about 970, 980 bird species. Costa Rica's got over 1,200. So the diversity there is spectacular. So that is very, very much on my list one day. See, Leander's just been in my ear down in Johannesburg, also saying he'd love to get to Costa Rica. I think if you like wildlife, then that is a really good place to go. I believe I'm right in saying that in terms of surface area of the country, it has the greatest amount of conserved areas or protected areas of any country in the world, which again is an attractive reason to go there. And then I have to get to the rainforests at some point. I'd love to see all the different primate species there. Of course, top of the list would be to see a jaguar or a black panther, a melanistic jaguar. That has to be up there. Kookaburra as well. They look quite good fun. I'd like to see those. And strangely, I've got a real hankering to see a giant anteater. I think those are such funny looking things. That would be amazing to see, but I believe not. It doesn't happen very often. And also just the insect life. I personally find the insect world and the insect kingdom. Well, it's not a kingdom, but you know what I mean. The insect order particularly fascinating. I think the diversity of it is just so incredible. All the different ways in which those insects uh, the different strategies they've evolved, the different adaptations of their bodies, from producing sounds to their different flight mechanisms, to the way that they reproduce. It's just so amazing, and there are some weird and wonderful bugs to be found. Not looking forward to seeing my first bird-eating spider or anything like that. I'm not going to lie. Um, as long as I can see it from a distance, that'll be absolutely fine. I think I would probably die if I had one on me, the size of a dinner plate. Not a fan of touching spiders. Looking at them, find them fascinating. I think they're incredible animals. But yeah, I don't really want one that size on me. Thank you very much. I struggle enough with baboon spiders. Deborah Crosby, you're saying these impalas look like the white-tailed deer that you see every morning when you look out your back door. Well, I envy you for living in such a place where you can see deer every day, although I do know that white-tailed deer have become a little bit of a problem um, over in the States, certainly. But yeah, very similar to a sort of standard deer, but a hugely successful antelope species. Julian Thomas, you've been to Costa Rica. Well, I am very jealous of you already. 500 bird species in a 3 week trip. That's pretty impressive, certainly. My bird list for the entirety of South Africa is just shy of 600 in over a decade. So that just goes to show if you love birding, Costa Rica should be very, very high on your list. Actually saw something a little while ago on social media of a guy who had just seen his 10,000th, that's quite a difficult word to say, bird species throughout the world. Imagine having a life list of 10,000. If there are any other recommendations that people have got for great wildlife related trips, or particularly from a birding perspective, seems that's the angle that we've gone on, then by all means do recommend. But yeah, there are so many things I'd like to see. I'd love to see a wolverine, especially again having watched the recent mammals episode. I think wolverines are pretty amazing. I'd like to see some of those. Um, where else would I like to go? Pretty much anywhere I haven't been, to be quite frank. But yeah, South America, the South American continent in general, I think is probably the next one. I have to say as well, I have spent time in East Africa. I worked in Katavi National Park in Tanzania in the southwestern corner, but despite being based up there for the best part of a year, I never got a chance to go up to the Serengeti or the neighbouring Mara, which was such a shame. I always feel guilty that but I just wasn't able to. It was so remote where we were, and I was doing fairly long cycles there. Basically, did 5 months on, 2 months off. I came back to South Africa, came back for another 4 months, and then went back again. So I would like to see the migration, although I'm a little bit tentative from what I know of how many vehicles are there and how. Again, I haven't been, so I can't say for sure. But from what I know, how less controlled it is, let's put it that way, than say the private reserves in southern Africa, where number of vehicles in a sighting can be controlled. It can get a little bit chaotic in Kruger. And if you've been in there and there's lions on the road, you can be stuck in a traffic jam and people get a little bit grumpy with each other, and it's just not a very nice experience. So slightly tentative of that, but the experience in itself, I'm sure, would be well worth it. Well, since it seems a little bit quiet at Rosie's Pan at the moment, we were lucky enough to see yesterday morning the Thakazile Pride that were lying up just next to where we saw those impalas just now. So I think we've got a little clip to show you what we sometimes miss. Let's have a look and see what they're up to. Oh, beautiful. Always hope when I do these live at the Waterhole sessions that one day we're going to get some lions or a leopard come down to drink. It's not happened for me yet, but I suppose if we do it long enough, it will. I see those lions were distracted by something. Let's see if we can see what they saw. Ah, possibly what they saw, a little daker. Look at that light. It looks like they're watching tennis. There's no great interest shown in hunting. They know that they've been seen. Very much not hunt mode. I'm sure the youngsters are interested, but nice to see some different generations. Look at those big feet. Well, spectacular. Well, we live in hope that something of that is going to happen whilst I'm doing this live. But what a beautiful scene that was. Such stunning light early morning there. You could see that sort of reddish colour glinting off their fur. And that poor little Dacre probably thought he was going to come and have a drink and thought better of it. I had spent some time in Oliphant's West Game Reserve. It was my first ever job back in the latter half of 2007, but I don't recall the name Thakazile Pride. Trying to even remember the names of the prides that we saw there. It's far too long ago. Been very fortunate to see multiple prides of lions over the years. They do have sort of drifted together. Names have escaped me, but it is wonderful when you can work in a one area for a while and you really feel you get to know these animals. I remember when I worked at Sabi Sabi in the southern part of the Sabi Sands for about 3.5, 4 years, and spent my entire time there watching the Southern Pride as we knew them, watched cubs get born, watched some not make it, watched others grow into maturity and leave the safety of the pride, and you do feel an uncanny attachment to them, certainly. And I remember doing some freelance work in the western sector of the Sabi Sands. I think I was at Savannah at the time. Um, and some of the young males from the Southern Pride who had left had sort of set up territory up there. I think they became on to be known as the Salati males. I remember seeing them feeding on a deceased hippo that had been in a fight with another hippo. And it was so nice for me to catch up with them after a year or two. And I do remember feeling a sort of a pang of disappointment that when I started speaking and telling people about this pride and how I'd seen them grow up, that there was no recognition of the lions in my brain, I think, or my heart, perhaps. I think I wanted at least one of those lions to sort of stop and look up and go, hang on a minute, I remember that voice. I've heard him nattering on in the background throughout my entire childhood. But there was no such recognition, and I do remember feeling rather unjustifiably disappointed and slightly hurt by that. But it's hard not to build up a rapport with these animals, as you as viewers will know. Deborah Cosby, you're saying wonderful for the Sakazile Pride. Absolutely, it was. And Mercedes Bean, the beautiful ladies. Yes, they were indeed. And lovely to see their cubs. But I think we're going to continue on our little camera safari. We're going to head down to Stony Point, Betty's Bay, and see what's happening by the ocean. And we've got the Hyrax. A very sleepy looking Hyrax. He's dragging himself out of his rock crevice. I'll try and warm up in the sun, I would think. He looks like he's definitely struggling to open those eyes there. I imagine he's going to plonk himself in a patch of sunshine and have a little doze. They're often the best dozes, aren't they, when you wake up and you don't have to get up and you drop back off again for another half an hour or so. Very satisfying sleep. Jamala, you're saying you love Stony Point. It's a nice change of pace, isn't it? We do get a little, I'd say obsessed, that's the wrong word, but we get very caught up in hoping to see lions and elephants and seeing all the antelope species that we find around the waterholes. It's nice to see some of the different diversity, the coastal life that we have across the country and across the continent. It's not every day you get to see dussies so nicely close up, like we have been doing for the last few days. And occasionally we get something like a little reptile. What are you? A very blurry reptile. Possibly a little flat lizard or something there. And there we go, looks more like a skink. I would suggest, let's say this is not an area that I have frequented very often. I have been to Boulders Beach, for example, but never been to Betty's Bay, personally. In fact, I think I've only ever been to the Western Cape 2 or 3 times. So my knowledge of reptiles that would occupy that area are not wonderful, I would think. Well, I know. So we'll just settle with the lizard. Nanny, you're saying you have a bird list for the UK, or asking if I have a bird list for the UK. I do. It's not particularly impressive. You're saying you recently saw an osprey and a red kite in Wales. I did see a kite down where I am in southern England. A couple of days ago, actually, just flew over that very diagnostic forked tail, but I think my bird list for here is probably not more than about 50. Thankfully, my mother and my grandfather, when he was around, were quite keen birders. Unfortunately, I just haven't visited very often. That's what I'm doing here at the moment. We have gone down to a couple of wetlands areas and ticked off a few that I didn't have before, certainly. And then you also, now this is a difficult one to say, you're off to the, give me a second to try and pronounce this one, Ardnamurchan Peninsula in western Scotland, where you've seen puffins, razorbills, and some WT eagles. You see, I'm not even sure what that is. My bird knowledge of England is really not very good, which is embarrassing to say. But I have seen none of those things, certainly. The one I was hoping to get recently when I went down to Cornwall was a chough, which is kind of like a big raven with red legs, quite specific to the north coast of Cornwall, but was not able to identify one, unfortunately. But I wish you good luck for your forthcoming birding trip. Hope you get some new ones for your life list. If you can give us a positive ID on this little reptile, by all means send it in. Be interested to know what we come up with. Looks a little bit too sort of granular to be a skink, so I think I'll settle with some form of flat lizard. I talked about this the other day. It'd be interesting if we could see the top of his head and that parietal eye, which is a little organ that all lizards have got on their head. It looks like a little circle, almost like an ear opening, but it's not. It's a specialised organ that picks up changes in daylight intensity, length of days, and just helps to control hormonal regulation within the body. But you can certainly see it on reptiles. A lot of other animals also have what is called the pineal gland, which is what that parietal eye would be sort of connected to. That's picked up through the amount of light hitting the retina, and again controls hormonal secretions within the body, usually with regard to mating, knowing when is the right time of year to mate based on the length of day, length of daylight hours. Spas, you're saying that's a type of one of the girdled lizards. Thank you for that. I could see some sort of serration there around the back of his neck when he turned his head, so that would make sense. I think I've seen a girdled lizard in the Lowfell, but once only, I think. But good to know. Thank you, Spas. of white-breasted cormorants that we often see enjoying these rocks. See, Ents, you can remember the spiny-tailed girdled lizard. It's quite the mouthful. But excellent, I shall have to do a little bit of reading up on those. So it'll be interesting to see if they occur in other parts. I'm a Bumalunga girl from Dorset. A black kite stole your husband's breakfast bacon or bagel at the Hwangi Game Park Lodge. I can certainly believe that. I got attacked by a seagull the other day whilst enjoying an ice cream on the beach. We are silly in England. It's freezing cold, but we still eat ice creams on the beach. But they are getting very good at that. Of course, we have monkeys to worry about as well. I've never actually been attacked by a bird over in South Africa or Southern Africa, but monkeys absolutely. They take no prisoners, and unfortunately they have very little fear of humans. A lot of the ones that hang out in lodges. You can keep them away though. A lot of places put a stuffed leopard out, or even just a picture of a leopard, and then like a nice big coffee table book open up on the table there, and it's enough to dupe the monkeys even just for a short time. The nanny, you were saying it was a white-tailed eagle. That would make sense, white-tailed eagles, yep. Well, speaking of large birds, let's head over to Victoria Falls and see what we can find there. Variety of what look like white-backed and hooded vultures, a couple of marabou storks in the background, and I'm hoping, because we saw some last week, we might get to see that little black heron doing his Batman impression whilst hunting in the water. Well, sorry everybody, it seems like we just had a bit of a picture issue, so we're going to enjoy Stony Point a little bit longer, to enjoy that rhythmical motion of the waves. Being controlled, of course, by the pull of the, well, I was going to say by the pull of the moon, but it's a little bit of a, I don't want to say a fallacy, of course the moon does exert gravity, but there's a bit of a sort of misunderstanding that we have higher tides at full moon because of the full moon. But remember, it doesn't matter where the moon is on its 28.5-day path around the Earth. The gravitational pull that it effects on our water and on our planet remains exactly the same. The phase is irrelevant in terms of the gravity it gives off. Of course, what gives us the higher tides around full moon is the fact that the sun and the moon are all lined up in a straight line, so we get the combined effect of both of those bodies pulling on the Earth's water as opposed to just one of them. And so when we have our spring tides at a higher tides, we get that at full moon and new moon because everything's in a straight line in what's called syzygy, which is a great word for Scrabble. And when we get our neap tides, which are our lower high tides and higher low tides, where things are a little bit more averaged out, is when the moon is at half a phase, first or last quarter, because it's at 90 degrees to the sun, so the pull exerted by both of those objects is more evenly distributed. So a lot of people think we have high tides because it's full moon. So the phase is irrelevant. It's actually the added influence of the sun and the moon both pulling in the same direction that causes the greater effect. Typical Hyrax behaviour, blowing in the sun, warming up nicely. Perfect little ledge that they've got there. Obviously a good stretch, a twitchy foot going on. Tilipau asking if there's a hierarchy among vultures. Well, certainly among vulture species, within individual members of a species, I have no doubt there is, but it's something very difficult to monitor, as they're quite difficult to differentiate unless they've been ringed or have any sort of very, very obvious features. So I couldn't say for sure whether there is amongst individuals, but I'm sure there will be in terms of dominance and size and, let's say, attitude. But in terms of different species, yes, the lappet-faced is the largest and most powerful. Most other vultures will move out of the lappet-faced sway. Next in size would be the Cape vulture, although again not very many of those, less than 10,000 left in the world, but we are lucky enough to see them often up in the Lowveld area because they breed on the cliffs of the Drakensberg Mountains. And then you've got the whitebacks. White-headeds will sort of come in somewhere close to the top as well, although again don't see them all that often. And then bottom of the pecking order will be the little hooded vultures that come in at the end, the smallest of the lot. They wait their turn, but also perfectly adapted with their small bills to get into the little nooks and crannies that the other vultures with bigger bills are not able to reach. Camouflage of these Hyraxes. Let's not go that one shot. This one just under this first rock, blending in beautifully with the colorations there. I see Spacio asking what else lives in these rocks. other than hyraxes and lizards. But again, having been to Betty's Bay and not honestly knowing coastal wildlife particularly well, it's hard for me to say. But a variety of little arthropods, you get rock scorpions, there might be snakes. I'm sure if there are any little things like mongoosey type equivalents, ground squirrels, those sorts of things would like those little crevices in the rocks. Maybe even some sort of rock rabbity things, but I don't really know what else one would expect to find in this area, unfortunately. But those little crevices in rocks are perfect little hidey holes for a huge variety of things, of that I have no doubt. We've got a little gull gracing us with his presence there, I would think, or a couple of them, possibly a Hartleb's gull. They often do occur in that area. Trying to see if there's any coloration on the beak. Grey-headed gull, another possibility. I'd say gulls notoriously difficult to identify, particularly at the different stages of their life. Things like the kelp gull, which we get equivalent of over here in England. When I went down to some of the wetlands areas, there's loads of different types of gull there, or 5 or 6 species, but the herring gulls there, they look a little bit different at 1 year, at 2 years, fully grown, quite a few different morphs, very, very difficult to distinguish between them. Really to tell the difference between the grey-headed gull and the Hartleb's gull. If you want to have a look at the eye, a grey-headed has a pale eye and the Hartleb's has a darker eye. I was testing my birding skills this morning with coastal birds. Oh, thank you, zoomies. Ah, because he didn't want to be properly identified. Have a look at this one. I'd say that looks like a dark eye. Yeah, so I shall go with my first initial thought, which is the Hartleb's gull. Judy Patmore, you're saying it's lovely to hear me back on live at the Warthogs. And it really is great to be back, so I've been away for a little while and I have missed this, connecting with you, seeing all of these amazing things that we get to see, even things that are not necessarily my forte, but that is how we learn. I cannot wait to get back out into the bush. First thing I shall be doing when I get back will be booking a trip into the park. I'm going to spend a few days just wandering around Kruger and enjoying everything it has to offer. Heavy Pantling asking how do animals survive parasitic and toxic water they drink. Um, well, sometimes they don't. Some of them do pick up bacteria and viruses, and we have things called red tides, which are those great blooms of algae that can cause very, very bad water conditions, certainly. So some animals do get poisoned by water, but generally speaking, I think an animal is able to know if water is particularly bad, and they will avoid them. I imagine it would give off a smell, which of course is how most animals recognise the world. But also remember that their stomachs are very different from our own. We're very susceptible to viruses and particularly waterborne bacterias. But I've seen lions and leopards drinking out of the most fetid, muddy puddles. Hippos live in a pretty rancid environment, particularly during the dry season, full of their own excreta and urine, and they also seem to get away with it without too much problem. So their stomachs have just got different antibodies and different things within them that's just far better able to deal with it than we are, for example. Oh, Kathy Lee, you were enjoying the chilling dazzles. Yes, weren't we just? The great sunbathers of our time. Beautiful views of that rhythmic ocean. There was something very soothing about watching the gentle lapping of the waves on the shoreline. So going back to those tidal forces, what a lot of people don't know is that the entire Earth is subjected to those forces. It's not just water. We see the water moving because it's far more malleable, but under the right conditions, the entire surface of the Earth can move by up to about half a metre under the strain of those tidal forces from the Moon and the Sun. We just don't realise it or feel it because it's such a large percentage of the planet. The whole Earth raises and falls by half a metre or so. Even more severe if you're on the Moon, of course, because we exert a greater pull on the Moon than the Moon does on us. We don't see it because there is no liquid water on the Moon. There's some ice, certainly, but it's not so obvious. But we've measured seismic events on the Moon, we believe caused by Earth's gravity. There's an awful lot more going on a far bigger scale than we perhaps realise. Kathy Lee, well, I also hope it's not long till I get a chance to get back to Juma. We'll have to see what happens, but if the opportunity is there, I will most definitely be hopefully taking it. Hopefully sometime during the winter, but we'll cross fingers. But I would love to get back and catch up with some of the characters there. I always enjoy going to have a look for the Ghost. It's always a treat to see Queen Columba. Had some amazing sightings with her. And of course, having been away for a little while, it'll be interesting to see the changes in the dynamics between those territorial animals. I always find, having worked in both sort of enclosed private reserves which are fenced on all sides and open systems such as the Greater Kruger, there is such more excitement for me working in those open systems because you have the opportunity to see animals immigrating and emigrating out of areas. You get to see these territorial disputes, territories change hands, interactions between interlopers that are coming in and out. It's far more of a natural area. So I've worked in reserves where there's just one lion pride or one herd of elephants, and it's great because you know that they're always there. But it's also a little bit annoying if you don't find them for a day or two because you know you've just failed. It's not that they've perhaps moved out of that area and there quite literally isn't a lion to be found. You know they're there. You just can't find them. It makes you feel a little bit stupid sometimes. So far nicer to let nature do its thing and watch those interactions that have been going on for millions of years before we put boundaries and started blocking off those routes and altering the behaviour. One reserve I used to work at, we had the most beautiful male lion there, not a scratch on him, always perfectly coiffed hair, those beautiful lions. They look like sort of Alex the lion out of Madagascar. Perfect, but he'd never had a fight in his life. He'd grown up there, he'd taken over that area, or was gifted that area, never had to fight for that area, and looked it. And I thought he was much older. I assumed he was sort of 5 or 6 based on his stature and his coloration and his size. It turns out at the time I think he was only 3.5. And I was amazed that he'd sort of developed so quickly, having seen 3.5-year-old males in other areas. And I can only assume that because his body had realised that there was no competition, he could focus all of his energy on growing big and strong and not have to worry about anything else. So it developed more rapidly than you would expect in a wilder environment. Leander, I didn't quite hear where we're going next. Sorry, it broke up there, but for everybody watching, we're going to go somewhere else where there is something. Let's go. Jamala, I think, so up to Medicare. Oh, wow, look at that. What an aggregation of animals. About time we had some elephants and a huge group of giraffe and a few zebras. Let's just enjoy this scene for a while. Those little youngsters having a scuffle. That's a shame. I hope the giraffe come back. It's not every day you get to see such a big group of giraffe out in the open, but evidently those young boys need a little bit more space for their antics. What a beautiful scene. Oh, another going into the water. How about that, everybody? What a spectacularly African scene. How many giraffe we got there? 12 or 15 giraffe. Elephants in the water. Zebras having a drink. Absolutely spectacular. Elephants chasing warthogs. And zebras. That's awesome. Mindy Tillipar, well, if you love giraffes, Apparently, Jamala is the place to be right now. All the different shades, lighter giraffes, darker giraffes, older giraffes, more melanin in the skin. I think this elephant's going to chase them off again, though. Obviously got his sphere of danger that no giraffes are allowed to come into, but now he's going to go and kick off over there. It's like Fight Club for elephants. Boys will be boys. Yeah, ants. I agree. I was just sort of mentioned that as well. The different tints of giraffe, the different colorations. So we sort of briefly touched on it yesterday. Males often darker than females. Older animals usually darker than younger animals due to testosterone levels, to exposure to the sun. Lots of other sort of potential reasonings that we don't fully understand, but nice to see lots of different shades and diversity. The elephant boys have moved off. The giraffe have got a chance to cut. Oh, that youngster was just going to go and have a drink. I don't think he's going to get very far. Well, that's a bold young giraffe. They're normally very skittish. Elephant patrolling the bank. Jamala, it is a beautiful waterhole, and so absolutely glorious scene. I'm loving this little young giraffe, though. He's quite plucky. Doesn't seem to be too perturbed by this elephant having a bit of a standoff. Yeah, maybe just retreat to the safety of mum. This elephant needs to learn to share a little bit better. So nice to see such a group of giraffe. Of course, there are lots of collective nouns for animals, and they seem to be more for giraffe than I think of anything else. You've probably heard of some of the classics, the stretch of giraffe, when they're sort of standing around, the stretch of giraffe, a tower of giraffe. And then when they're all moving, there's a journey of giraffe. One I do like, which you don't hear very often, and again, I don't really know who comes up with these things, is a kaleidoscope of giraffe. I think that's a lovely word to describe a group of giraffe, but you don't hear it used very, very often. Vic Lanford, you're You're also watching from a dreary UK, so am I. And yes, also jealous of those crystal clear blue skies, all the animals and birds, particularly at Jamala here. This is a really spectacular scene. Kathy Lee also, yes, one elephant is a lot greyer than the others, but don't forget the colour of the elephants is dictated really by the type of soil that they've been, I say living in, but utilising, spraying it on themselves. So even in a one game reserve such as Badikwe, which is 70,000 hectares, that's a huge area, and there are different areas with different geologies, which will give you different types of soil based on the minerals. Um, oh, this elephant's still intent on seeing off these giraffes. So perhaps that elephant has come from a different area. Yeah, nice to see the different colorations. And Mindy Dinapar also saying she could sit by Waterhole all day and watch the comings and goings. No animal is safe from this elephant. But I agree with you, Mindy. It is really nice if you've got the patience to just sit and wait. There's two ways of viewing animals, really. One is to go and look for them and drive around and try and track them down or trust to luck. And the other way is to just wait in one area and see what comes a calling. A great time to do it, particularly during the winter months at these artificial waterholes. All animals really need to drink, a lot of them being very water dependent. Big elephant bull needing up to 200 litres of water a day. So if you wait long enough in one spot, it can usually be very productive. I remember up in Tanzania when I was there, we used to just go and sit by the water holes and the floodplains there, and it would be quite normal to see lions and elephants, and we had rowan antelope, Liechtenstein's hartebeest, big herds of eland, all sorts of amazing things up there that would just come and go and drift in and out like the tides throughout the day. Very therapeutic. Very grey, this elephant, certainly. I'm sure after he's had a bit of a mud bath, things will change. He wandered off from the rest of the group or found itself a nice little wallow somewhere that the others missed. It seems like the youngsters have got their wish and pushed everything back into the tree line now, not stopping a little bit of bickering between them. It's so important, this play, social interaction, muscle development, learning how to be big elephants. Just wonderful to watch. All this playtime, of course, does get the blood pumping, and there is an awful lot of blood which needs to be cooled inside these massive animals. The big elephant bull, believe it or not, can contain a stupendous amount of blood, around about 300 litres, so that's the size of a standard bath. And if you compare that to us, where we have about 6 or 7 litres of blood, a huge amount that needs to be pumped around the body by that heart. An elephant heart's particularly large, can weigh up to around about 20 kilograms in a big adult, and can pump that entire amount of blood around their body in just, well, around about sort of 15 to 20 minutes. Lots of shenanigans going on. That's why, of course, playing around in the water is so important, to keep cool. We've seen all that lovely wrinkly skin that elephants have got, but studies under a microscope will show you that those wrinkles are even found on a microscopic level, and that's very important, so that all that water and the mud that they splatter on themselves gets into those little wrinkles, those little pits, and just helps to create a barrier against that oppressive African sun and help keep them cooler for longer. Couple that with, of course, their flapping of their ears, with those veins on the back of the ears, cool that blood and send that cooled blood around the body. Very, very thin skin on the ears, only a couple of millimeters thick. Compare that to the rest of the skin, which is around about 2.5 centimeters thick. Very, very good way of keeping cool in these environments. Whatever, just patrolling the bank, causing trouble, hoping to catch another one offside and give them a little bit of a rumble like this. These youngsters really got the bit between their teeth. There's one at the back's coming in at pace as well. I wonder if he's going to lay down a little bit of discipline. But you often see this with elephants as they come close to the water. They get quite excited and accelerate. Yeah, changed his mind. Some zebras instead. So wonderful to see interaction between different species. It was, and it's continuing to be a spectacular view. But let's head over to Japan, see what's happening up there. Oh, we've got a little family of warthogs. Hello, warties. It's been having a good scratch in the butt. A couple of piglets there, probably from last year. And a big male who's showing a little bit too much interest, perhaps. Easy to distinguish him by his larger size. There's enlarged warts, which is, of course, just sort of calloused, fatty, deposity skin under the eyes. And that second set of warts halfway down the snout, which the females lack. Now, there's no great parental care or family groups in warthogs. Normally, males are independent from the females and will only meet up if he feels that there is a mating opportunity, which is possibly what is happening here. Maybe those youngsters are beginning to become of age, showing a little bit of interest there. They don't seem too interested though. Oh, sorry everybody, looks like we had a few feed issues there, which is a shame, because that was some of the interesting behaviour we were seeing from those warthogs. So we've ducked back to Tuma, a beautiful male impala. Slightly younger one in the background there. You can see the difference in the shape of the horns. That's one of the ways we sort of age impalas. You can see the one on the left there is going to be approximately 2 years of age. There he would have been born in November, so more like about sort of either 18 months or 2.5, depending on his age. But normally we'd expect to see that step that we see on the one on the right there only developed by about 3 years of age. So normally straight horns around about 1 year. There's that sort of curve where they almost meet in the middle, kind of heart-shaped, around about 2 years, and then the characteristic double step or that characteristic twist that you get in the impala horns from around about 3 years and up. And then life expectancy, say for an impala, only around about 6 or 7 years. Yeah, I'd probably assume that one's about 18 months old. Associating with the Egyptian goose. They're very specific breeding seasons, so as we said earlier, all brought out by the changes in day length. And about sort of March, April will be time of the rut, and then all the impalas fall pregnant, and then we'll give birth starting for around about November and around about sort of a 4-week period. Flood the market with baby impalas, good for predators, increase the chance of success for your own offspring. See with a standard oxpecker there, causing a nuisance of himself. The impala's probably enjoying a little bit of a groom. Maybe you've got specific ticks that tend to occupy specific areas on an animal. So something like the blue-eared tick, for example, will, even if it joins by the ankle or by the hoof, will migrate up the body and end up in an animal's ears. Even ticks have their own ecological niches that they have to fulfill, or where they are most successful. Sebastian asking whether warthogs sometimes feed on aquatic plant roots. I also noticed that it's not something that I've seen very often. You often see the warthogs associated, of course, with the water and their wallowing tactics, but I'm trying to wrap my brain to think if I've ever seen one sort of eating aquatic vegetation. It's not something that I would associate with them, certainly, but we did see them eating. So I guess they do, but they're not particularly picky feeders. And no reason why they wouldn't, I suppose. It's softer vegetation, much greener than the surrounds, so likely has a higher nutritional value. So I'm assuming that's what they were doing, but you would think if that's the case, they would do it more often. You'll often see them grazing on the grass in and around water or on the edges of waterholes, but I don't remember seeing them of actually feeding on aquatic vegetation like that. But as you mentioned there with roots, that is the way that the warthogs do like to feed. They use those very flat shovel-shaped noses to push over the grass and get to the roots, or the rhizomes as they're known. That's where the grass, the perennial grasses that survive for multiple seasons, will store their nutrients during the drier months. And of course it is relatively dry. We can see how dry a lot of these locations are, so good to eat the roots. And it's one of the reasons the warthogs do really struggle in drought conditions. I know up in the Dikwe, for example, they've got a lot of warthogs there. A lot of them do succumb. But it's a good sign that if your warthog population is not doing very well, there really isn't much nutritional value in your grass at all. Okay, well, I think let's go chance our arm back up in Jamala again, where we had that lovely aggregation of animals, and see if it's still going on. Looks as if the chaos of the young elephants has subsided, left a bit of an opening for other animals to finally come down and utilise some of that water. We've got a few more giraffes milling around, a couple of zebras. Great to see giraffes having a drink again. Strangely, I'm sitting here in the UK, surrounded by giraffes. Actually, my parents enjoy their African, dare I say, trinkets. But we've got various models of giraffe, and even pretty much I wouldn't say life size, but probably about a 2.5 meter sculpture of a giraffe in the garden. So you can get all sorts of these things. You go down to the markets. In southern Africa, you can find some incredible carvings of elephants, giraffes, warthogs, often done out of a variety of different woods. Leadwood is a very, very beautiful wood, but very, very difficult to carve with. Those would be the expensive ones. But if you go to the right market, it's almost like a little bric-a-brac shop. You can get absolutely anything with African wildlife on it. But there is something very unique about giraffes. Elephants are still causing trouble. This youngster just patrolling in. Evidently they haven't left the area yet. I think that's just being. Are you just being a pain, or are you literally just passing through? Hard to tell with these young elephants. They do like to chase things. Oh, look, little tiny baby zebra. But you can find some, say, amazing sculptures and carvings in those markets. Huge amount of skill. Testing two different techniques. That giraffe going for the much more knee bend, whereas the other one went for the far more splayed leg approach. There's no easy way to get a drink, particularly when you're drinking from the top of a little bank. You'd think they'd go to the more gentle slope. I think I'll give that last elephant the benefit of the doubt. He was just moving through, clearing a path. Oscar, you're asking if you can tell a giraffe is male or female by looking at their ossicones. Absolutely, you can. It's one of the quickest ways to identify the sex of a giraffe out in the field. So, ossicones, for those of you who don't know, are those sort of horny protrusions on the top of a giraffe's skull. So, both sexes have them, but there is very much a difference in their size and structure. Males, because they use them for fighting, swinging their necks at each other for dominance. Male ossicones are much, much thicker and generally don't have any hair on their heads. They're like men when they get to my age, they start losing hair in certain areas, and they're often quite sort of balding on top. That's because the hair has been rubbed away during these little conflicts with other males, and also because of calcium being deposited there to increase their efficacy in terms of a weapon. So they're generally much sturdier and bald. Females, much, much thinner ossicones and more tufty in appearance. I always say they look a little bit like paintbrushes, much more hair on the top. It gets a little more complicated for young animals, of course, because those ossicones, when they are born, they're called ossicones and not horns because they are not officially horns, as the name would suggest. So a horn is bone covered in this sort of keratin sheath. whereas you can see here that is just sort of skin with fur over a bony protrusion. So when they're born, because giraffes are born with ossicones, they're very soft and supple. They're actually cartilage, a little bit like that is found in your ear. And when the little one comes out, those ossicones are folded back against the head and they kind of pop up. And then it takes a few years for that cartilage to ossify or become bone. And it takes longer in males than it does females because the males are more substantial, so the process is slower. So normally a female will take a couple of years, males could take 3 or 4 years to completely ossify. And on that vein, so it's not unusual to see a male giraffe with sort of wonky ossicones, one growing in a different direction, because boys will be boys, as we've seen with the elephants, and often young males will sort of play fight. And if those ossicones take a big impact or deliver a big impact and they haven't yet fully set in position, they can be sort of knocked to one side and only then ossify. So that's why you sometimes do see males with funny shaped ossicones. So it's the easiest way to identify a giraffe. You often see their heads before anything else, poking out like a periscope out of those short acacia-y trees. So yeah, quick look with the naked eye or a scan with a pair of binoculars should be able to help you sex the giraffe just from them. That's the young elephants causing a havoc. Run, Impala, run! See, this young elephant looks as if he's waiting to choose his next victim. Who shall I chase? That one? That one? See, the ears out. It's a good behavioural sign that he's all flustered. But these youngsters, particularly the young bulls, they've lots of uncontrolled testosterone flooding through their bodies. And they can be great entertainment, particularly on an open safari vehicle. They'll come and posture up and get a little bit aggressive is the wrong word, but just flexing some muscles. And they'll often come running towards the car and trumpeting, and then when you don't move, they kind of lose their bottle, and then they'll back off and run back to the safety of mum. There's restored a little bit of order now. Time to move on. You can see tempers are less frayed from the little one. been put back in line. Come on, stop messing around. It's time to go. I thought he was going to have a little go at that giraffe that was approaching him, but looks like Mum's calming influence has helped somewhat. Allow a little bit of peace and solace for the other animals there. You can see this warthog's taken the opportunity, plonked himself down in the mud. So a little bit of order restored. The giraffe will come in, so that's definitely a male. You can see those balding ossicones. It looks like a young male, this one. I see we've had a question from Andrew about what subspecies of giraffe we're watching. Andrew, that's a very confusing one, and I've never sort of fully wrapped my head around this whole giraffe species and subspecies thing because it changes so regularly. But from what I know of at the moment, there are currently 4 species of giraffe divided into a variety of subspecies. We are looking at what I would call the southern giraffe, of which there are 2 subspecies now, and we are looking at the South African giraffe, basically. But the other subspecies under southern giraffe is the Angolan giraffe, but that doesn't extend down to South Africa naturally, to my knowledge. But so I'll hold my hands up and say that this is something I've tried to look into before, and it's changed so many times during my sort of 16, 17 years of working with wildlife that I wouldn't say I've given up trying, but I'm a little bit off off the boil in terms of as to exactly what's what at the moment. But to my knowledge, this is the South African giraffe from the Southern African species. Oh, I hope that mud under the left hoof doesn't give way. Imagine a giraffe doing the splits would be rather unpleasant. Interesting. The one on the left went for the more split approach. This one, the more knees bent approach. It's not something I've really sort of noticed before, but obviously different techniques to achieve the same thing. See, not really much in the way of leg bending in comparison, or a much wider spread. A great way to end if we could get these giraffe doing some necking. A couple of young males, it wouldn't be unusual. And see, this one's ossicones. At this age, it's harder to be sure. I would assume female, looking at the size of them, but hard to say. We'd need to sort of look under the belly for any other obvious signs. Yeah, see, that actually looks like a young male. I think we're going to see some mounting behavior here. This is very much dominance behavior being shown by the older bull. You often do see male giraffe mount one another in a show of dominance. It's all about it. Seems to seem a little unsure now all the other ones have gone. Of course, always very nervous of potential predators sneaking up on them, or even crocodile. A young giraffe like that, not impossible for a big crocodile to take him out. Really not quite sure. Having a good look at the water's edge. Dave also asking why some of the giraffes are so much lighter in colour. Yeah, we sort of touched on it briefly before, but nobody really knows, Dave, to be honest. There's lots of theories that younger giraffes are lighter than older giraffe, and males are darker than. Hang on, let me get my head straight there. So male giraffes usually darker than females, and older giraffes usually darker than younger giraffes. One of the theories is that so as they get older, they're exposed more to the sunlight, and the melanin develops within the pigmentation in the skin, and the skin gets darker, just as if you were to live in a hot environment. You could actually see on that youngster there that it almost has like a darker saddle on the roof of on the top of its back, possibly because that area is exposed most to the sun. Is one of the theories. Otherwise, say other theories include in older animals, particularly the males, high levels of testosterone that manifest in more melanin. Lots of experiments being done to show, particularly in lions, that lionesses will prefer male lions with longer and darker manes. Something they look for in terms of sexual selection. So difficult to say. Otherwise, it may just be a genetic trait. I did notice earlier with that sort of that big group of giraffe that there were almost sort of two or three separate groups, and one group, as a rule, seems to be predominantly a little bit darker than another group. And if it is a family group with relatively shared genetics, then there may be something in that as well. But interesting that this one does have a darker saddle in the area that is most exposed to the sunlight. So maybe one or all of those things, Dave. We're just not 100% sure. Plucked up a sufficient amount of courage? No, we're still not sure. No, decided it's a little bit too scary. Possibly the elephant. I just saw an ear flap. Maybe the elephant's making the giraffe a little uneasy with all the movement. Worried it's going to miss the movement of something else sneaking up on him, perhaps. Dark Main Lover, thanking myself and Africam and everybody behind the scenes for another great live at the Waterhole show. It has been a good one. I've just noticed the time. Yes, we've only got about 5 minutes left now. But we've seen some lovely things again today. This Jamala Waterhole has been absolutely spectacular. This has been one of the best sightings, if we can call it that, at a waterhole in the last few times that I've done this. So nice to see so many animals, boisterous little young elephant bulls, big groups of giraffe, zebras, and all sorts. Very, very cool. Kathy Lee, also back to the giraffe debate there, saying you can identify the reticulated giraffe. Yes, that is quite an obvious one. The Maasai giraffe I spent quite a lot of time with up in East Africa. Their patterning is different. There's subtle differences, but they can be told apart. But it is a little bit of a minefield, the species and subspecies of giraffe. So trying to get a little bit of space to have a drink. Bit of a nudge going on down there. Nice to see another herd. Oh, goodness, little youngsters are going to go for some underwater swimming. Never actually seen an elephant swimming completely, but there have been reports of elephants crossing huge channels of water, very, very deep water, travelling for kilometres. Very efficient swimmers. Of course, being able to use your trunk as a snorkel helps. Yeah, what a great day at Jamala. Imagine if you just pulled up in your vehicle, as we were saying earlier, and you're just sitting down having your peanut butter sandwich or whatever you're having for lunch, and just watching all of these antics unfold in front of you. This youngster having a good belly scratch. You can see this big bull coming in. He's secreting a little bit of temperance, a little bit of must going on there, his reproductive state. You can see that fluid leaking out of the gland behind his eye, that temporal gland. We'll see how the others react. So he was a non-related male looking for potential breeding opportunities. Oh. You see the size difference between elephant cows and a big mature bull. Showing off a little bit, possibly, digging his tusks in. We are almost out of time, last couple of minutes now, so it's a good time to remind you of the time changes that kicked in today to counteract the changing day lengths. So again, as from today, then tomorrow again we will be live from 12:30 until 1:30. We're live at the 1:30 to. Oh, I've got myself all confused because I'm in a different time zone, but half an hour earlier than it has been. So 2:30 tomorrow for live at the Waterhole, and then on safari from today from 2:30 till 3, and then the sunset safari from 3 o'clock until 6 o'clock. But yeah, down to the last minute. I hope everybody's enjoyed today. It's been another spectacular afternoon of wildlife watching. Do stay with us for the sunset safari and tomorrow morning, and join us again for more live at Waterhole tomorrow. But thanks for all the questions, everybody in Joburg, Africam, and we will catch up with you again very, very soon. The elephant says bye.
Well, a very good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on How